I work with archives, not the kind that smell like dust and glue, but the kind that smell like silence. Silence has a scent, too, especially when you open a folder no one has touched in decades, and a cold breath of time seems to drift out. That evening in the basement of the Maritime Museum, I only had to finish a small task: verify inventory numbers for wireless telegrams tied to the first hours after the Titanic disaster. The exhibition team needed provenance confirmed, nothing sensational, just routine. I even brought a thermos of coffee because I knew the basement would pull warmth straight out of my bones. The overhead lights flickered like someone unseen was blinking at me in the dark. I signed the visitor log, pulled on gloves, and walked the narrow corridor toward the archive room. The ventilation hummed steadily, like a distant wave. The folder was labeled plainly, "Wireless, April 1912 copies." Inside were telegrams, extracts, protocols. Yellowed paper, uniform type, unfamiliar signatures. I flipped through the pages while my brain ran on autopilot, number, date, source, stamp. And then, between two standard sheets, there was a page that didn't belong. It wasn't like the museum copies. It was thinner, grayish, with a ragged edge, as if torn from a notebook. The lines were typed on an old machine but crooked, as if the typist's hands had been unsteady. At the top, in all caps, "Do not include in exhibition," I smirked. Every archive has someone who loved drama, but the text beneath it made me stop. It described an additional signal allegedly received by a coastal station after the Titanic should have gone permanently silent. It listed coordinates, a timestamp, and a short note in parentheses, like an operator's observation. Signal repeats as if transmitted automatically. No response to calls, no ship on the air. I leaned closer, a chill crawling up my spine, not fear, exactly, but curiosity. Archives are full of strange mistakes, but they rarely feel like the mistake is staring back. At the bottom, there was a pencil note: "Check with Marconi equipment." If confirmed, close it. I knew about the Marconi setup. The museum kept a reconstructed early 20th century receiver and transmitter for demonstrations. Sometimes they turned it on during tour. Crackle, hiss, theatrical little beep-beep sequences. Kids loved it. Adults filmed it. I should have put the page back and reported it to the curator. That's what responsible people do. But I work with archives, and sometimes archives whisper. I took the gray page and, glancing down the empty corridor, stepped into the adjacent room where the demonstration rig sat. It was warmer there, soft lights, wood-paneled walls meant to evoke a ship's cabin. The museum liked atmosphere. I powered on the receiver. First, silence, then the familiar background, crackling like salt on a hot pan. I turned the tuning dial. Somewhere far off, a sharp signal cut through, brief, precise. I froze. It repeated. And again, too steady, too stubborn, like a heartbeat. I remembered the note, repeats as if automatic. Almost jokingly, I began marking the rhythm in my notebook as Morse dots and dash. Pause. Again. I wasn't a professional radio operator, but everyone knows SOS. This was different, longer. I moved closer, pressed one headphone cup to my ear, blocking the ventilation's low roar. My fingers slid across the paper, counting. Short, long, long, short. Then the static shifted. The crackle seemed to step back, and in the thin quiet I heard something that tightened my throat. A click. Not electronic, not mechanical. Human, like a fingernail against a telegraph key when someone hesitates before pressing. And then cleanly a sequence. I wrote without blinking. My pulse matched the signal as if I'd been wired into someone else's rhythm. When it stopped, I sat completely still for several seconds, like after a phone call you don't want to end because it smells like bad news. Slowly, I translated the letters. It wasn't perfect. There were gaps. But the meaning was too clear to be random. Still here, I looked up at the empty room. The lamp above the table swayed slightly, though there was no draft. Somewhere in the ventilation, metal chimed like a distant wave striking a hull. "Still here," I whispered. I laughed, but it came out dry. My mind scrambled for logic. A hobbyist transmission, a prank, stray interference, a recorded demo bleeding into frequency. I turned the receiver off. Silence fell like a blanket. And then I heard it without the equipment, faintly, on the edge of hearing: beep, 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 like someone tapping wood from the other side of a wall. I pressed my palm to the paneling. It was cold. I switched the receiver back on to prove the sound was coming from the speaker. Only hiss, but the tapping remained. It wasn't coming from the device. It was coming from the corridor. I stepped out. The basement corridor was dimmer, the silence thicker like water. I took a few steps and stopped by the archive cabinets, exactly where I'd found the gray page. The tapping repeated short, long, Morse. A metallic taste rose in my mouth, like I'd swallowed cold iron. I hurried back, grabbed the gray page. The typed text was unchanged, but the pencil note at the bottom had altered. I know this with certainty because I read it twice. Check. It confirmed close it. Now the pencil letters were fresher. And the lines looked like they'd been drawn on damp paper, trembling on their own. It said, "Do not answer." My brain tried again to run into reason. Someone joked. Someone came in earlier. Someone had access, but the keys were with me. The basement cameras, they existed, but they glitched often, and no one should be writing on a museum document with pencil. The tapping in the corridor moved closer. Short and long beats with pauses like whoever was sending it knew I'd learned to listen. I didn't want to answer. I truly didn't, but my hand drifted toward the telegraph key. It was absurd. A grown adult in a museum basement at night, about to reply to. What? I touched the metal. It was ice cold, like a glass of water no one had ordered. The tapping stopped. Silence became so complete I could hear my blood. Then the receiver, without tuning, without searching, cut through with a single word, carved out of noise by rhythm. Open. I jerked my hand back. Open what? The cabinet, the door, the folder, me. The corridor clicked again, this time like a footstep. Slow, heavy, like wet fabric dragging over the floor. I gathered the papers, slid the gray page back between the others as if hiding it from sight, and headed for the exit. Each step sounded louder than the last. The stairwell door was locked like always. But the key that should have opened it wouldn't turn, as if the lock had seized. Behind me, another step. Closer. I swallowed air and tried again. The metal scraped, but wouldn't give. In the silence I heard the worst thing, not a scream, not a crash. I heard water. Not ventilation, not a pipe, water, a drop. Then another, as if the ceiling had begun to weep. I looked up. A dark bead hung from the lamp above the corridor. It swelled slowly, as if collecting in ocean. Then it fell to the floor. And for a moment I thought I saw something pale in its reflection, like a glove, like a hand reaching. I didn't look twice. I wrenched the key with all my strength. The lock snapped open. I burst up the stairs and slammed the door behind me hard enough to shake the walls. Upstairs, the museum lobby was warm and bright. The guard looked at me with sleepy eyes and asked if everything was okay. I nodded, unable to explain. I walked home instead of taking transit, even though it was far. It felt like if I sat in a confined space, the signal would catch up to me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen and listened to my apartment's quiet. And in that quiet, every so often, right at the edge of hearing, I imagined, beep, 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 beep. The next day I returned to the museum in daylight, with people, with noise, with sun in the windows. I went down to the basement with the curator and showed him the gray page. He read it carefully and shrugged. "That was never here," he said. "Everything scanned." "You must have mixed something up," I insisted. We opened the folder. The gray page was gone. No torn edges, no missing sheet, as if I'd invented it. I showed him my notebook, my Morse marks, and the decoded "still here." He looked at me the way people look at someone who didn't sleep and started imagining patterns. "You were down here at night?" he asked carefully. "The basement has strange sounds. Maybe you just need rest." I didn't argue. I only wanted it to be over. On my way out, I passed the glass case displaying the reconstructed Marconi key. It sat quietly, polished under the lights, like a harmless artifact. And that's when I noticed a detail on the placard beneath it, something I'd never registered before. In small print, demonstration mode, off. I stopped. Because I remembered turning the receiver on last night. And it worked. I leaned closer to the glass. On the wooden base of the key where fingers would rest there was a thin dark streak, like dried water. And on the placard itself, inside the case, beneath the perfectly printed text, another phrase had appeared. Not printed, not marker, as if someone had scratched it from the inside. "Open." I stepped back. At that exact moment my phone vibrated. A notification from an unknown number. The message was blank, no text, only an attachment, an audio file. I didn't want to open it. I truly didn't, but archives love being listened to. I pressed play. The speaker burst with familiar crackle and hiss, then the stubborn, steady heartbeat of a signal. Short, long, long, short. Then a pause. And a final message, shorter than last night. Your turn.